evening, mga katambol
Good
and
evening.
fellow drumheads. Good evening. Yun. Welcome to our second year of Pintig, a percussion festival. And too bad na hanggang ngayon nasa virtual platform pa rin tayo and hindi tayo nakikita at hindi tayo nagsasama-sama. But hopefully, sa susunod na festival, magsama-sama na tayo. So with me are my two co-hosts, namely Jason De Los Santos and John Eric Ginto. Kamusta kayo mga pogi?
We're doing all right. I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so excited to be part of this festival again. Kasi last year, it was a different platform. Ang platform before is performance siya. So iba-ibang kumbaga a 3 day of performers, of percussionists, drummers, and mallet players. So another exciting festival again this year kasi iba naman yung gagawin natin ngayon. So yun, okay, first I will introduce John and read this short but long biography. Okay? Ayun. So, John Eric Ginto is a graduating student taking up a Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration, major in Financial Management at College of Science, Technology and Communications Inc. in Sariara, Quezon. Wow, galing. Hindi pa siya music major nito ha. He is a mallet player of Ilan's Percussion and CSTC Marching Stallions and was able to get some awards in national competition for solo and group performances during the Philippine Drum and Lyre Associates Incorporated or the PIDLAI Music Championships from 2017 up to 2021. So ito yung mga awards niya, dami niyang awards. Second place, PIDLAI Music Championship 2017 Marimba Solo High School category. PIDLAI Music Championships 2018, second place, Duo Mallets Open Class category. PIDLAI Music Championships 2019, third place, Duo Mallets Open Class category. Hall of Famer na to dapat. PIDLAI Music Championship 2021, champion Duo Keyboard Percussions, Wood, bracket C. And PIDLAI Music Championships 2021, second place, Trio Keyboard Percussion, Metal, bracket C. So, ladies, mga katambol and drumheads, Mr. John Eric Ginto. Ayun. John Eric Ginto, can you can you read the profile of Jason De Los Santos? Uh-oh. It's off. Okay. Anyway, going back, bali, before John Eric will introduce Jason, and Jason is a student of Professor Daniel Bartolome, right, in UST?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. And is a present member of the Orchestra of the Filipino Youth now. And yun. So that's all I know with Mr. Jason De Los Santos. So we're still going to wait for John Ergito to read this profile. John Eric, are you there? Okay. Jason, maybe you be the one to read the bio first before John Eric.
Sure. So, Sir Lexter, he is a
Just call me
graduate of.
Papi.
I'm sorry.
Just call me Papi Lex.
Yes, Papi Lex.
Yeah.
so, Sir Papi Lex is a graduate from University of Santo Tomas Conservatory of Music with a teacher's diploma, a music major in percussion. He was a former timpani and percussion principal of the Manila Symphony Orchestra. He also performed as guest timpanist and percussionist with other professional orchestras here in the country. such as the Philippine Philharmonic Orchestra, the ABS-CBN Philharmonic Orchestra, and the Manila Philharmonic Orchestra. Wow. At present, he is the orchestra manager and faculty head of Ang Mission's Orchestra of the Filipino Youth, a vision of El Sistema in Valenzuela. He is also a
Venezuela,
percussion
not Valenzuela, Venezuela.
fellow. Sorry, uh, he is also a percussion faculty of the Central Escolar University Conservatory of Music in Manila, uh, and also St. Paul University, Manila College of Music and Performing Arts, and the National Youth Summer Music Camp in PSA McKinley, Los Baños, Laguna.
Makiling.
So, McKinley, sorry,
Makiling.
apologize for the pronunciation, but yeah, but wow, nice, nice. It's a very
Yeah.
nice, very cool.
Okay. John, can you read Jason's profile now?
Jason De Los Santos. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So Jason De Los Santos is a student in the University of Santo Tomas taking up Bachelor in Performance major in percussion. He is currently part of the University of Santo Tomas Symphonic Orchestra and Band. He is a percussionist in Ang Mission's Orchestra of the Filipino Youth, a version of the Sistema in Venezuela. He's also part of the Batingao March Band. He has joined percussion competitions such as the Bacoor International Music Championship and Medici International Music Competition, to name a few. Jason De Los Santos.
Welcome, guys. Welcome, guys. And we hope that this first part of our festival will be we are going to learn a lot kasi especially for your guys, you're both mallet players. I know, so it's really relevant. The topic is very relevant to your expertise. Okay, so before we call our featured guest, I will just read this profile. Okay, profile about Mr. Omar Caminates. Omar Carmenates is currently the Associate Professor of Percussion at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, when he oversees all aspects of the percussion program, including classical jazz and world percussion studies. He holds a Doctor of Music degree from Florida State University, a Master of Music degree in Percussion Performance from University of North Texas, and a Bachelor's degree in Music Education from the University of Central Florida. Omar is also a versatile musician, and his debut solo recording entitled The Gaia Theory was released through the Rattle Records in 2013. He can also be heard on the Cantaloupe Records release of John Luther Adams' concert length Inuksut for 9.99 Outdoor Percussionist. Wow. A work that he both co-commissioned and directed in the United States premiere. He's also the director and producer and arranger of the John Sata's Percussion Project, a collaboration aimed at recording and performing percussion ensemble arrangements of the works of New Zealand's most prominent composer, John Satas. The recordings and scores from this project are published through the Pharma Records and Promethean Publications. And also, Omar is a proud endorser artist for Grover Pro Percussions, Bigfoot, Remo Drumheads, Zildjian Cymbals, and Pearl Corporation Adams Music Instruments. Before we welcome Sir Omar Carmenates, we would like to show you a short video of his. Take it away. So, Jason and John, help me welcome Sir Omar Carmenates. Hi, sir. Good
Hi,
morning.
thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good
Hi, good
Thank you,
morning.
morning, sir.
Lester.
Yeah.
Good
Jason.
morning, sir.
Yeah,
So, how's
thank
the
you.
weather?
Appreciate it. Great. So I want to thank Jason, Lexter, and John for having me and hosting today. Feel free to pop in with any questions throughout the presentation I'm giving today as well. Happy to stop in the middle. And I want to thank Satur and Ryan and everyone else at PAS Philippines for hosting this and inviting me to be here. It is a beautiful 8:30 in the morning here for me. So I know it's 8:30 at night for you. So good evening to you all. So uh, when Satur approached me and asked me to join, I was like, sure, I'm happy to do it. And we're trying to come up with a topic for the clinic, and I thought it would be great to speak about a very significant portion of my career, and that is actually writing music for keyboard percussion, not necessarily playing for keyboard percussion instruments. So I thought I would talk today a little bit about both arranging and composing for keyboard instruments, and I'll talk a little bit about composing for other percussion instruments as well. That's okay. I might dabble in that a little bit as well. So yeah, I'm happy to dive right into my slides if that's okay.
Yeah.
To jump right in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before you go to your slides, can we have a brief description of your topic for tonight?
Yeah, sure. So basically, what I'll be doing is covering um, how to write and create music for keyboard percussion. You don't have to be a composer to write. I don't know if anyone here is a composer or not. I'm not. I don't have any degrees in composition, but a significant part of my career is writing music for percussion instruments. So I'm going to speak a little bit about writing for keyboard percussion in a concert hall setting, so indoors. But another big part of my life and my musical career is marching percussion and rudimental percussion. So I'll also be talking a little bit about writing for keyboard percussion instruments outside as well. How I go about that. I have a lot of years in the drum corps international circuit here in the U.S. I've written for lots of DCI drum corps. I'm a WGI indoor percussion judge, so that's a big part of my life too. On top of um, running a university college percussion program, and really living in the concert percussion world. So I kind of have a foot in both. So I'll be sharing a little bit about how to write for keyboard percussion instruments inside, and then a little bit also outside.
Okay.
All
Okay,
right.
sir. So before we start, I would just like to tell our viewers in Facebook that they're all free to ask questions and to type their questions on the comment box. So we will be able to read it and ask to Omar. And any questions will do as long as it is percussion related. Okay. Yeah. So without further ado, you may start now, sir. And thank you again for accepting our invitation to present here at our festival.
Of course, a little side note. I am my mother is from the Philippines,
Yeah,
and
I
so
heard.
I've never been back. I've never been. So this is my best. This is the closest I've ever been in the Philippines is virtually. So
And, and I also heard that you're also with Dr. Molina in your marching days, marching bands group
yeah,
before.
we went to high school together.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we're old friends. Yep.
yeah. So maybe you can come here together because I think he haven't been here as well.
Yeah, he's in the same boat. Yep, we both haven't been.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So you're very both welcome to visit us
We will.
and,
I'm happy to.
do workshops.
Yes, would love to.
Yeah. Okay, so hindi na natin patatagalin to mga katambol, mga ka-drumheads. Ladies and gentlemen, percussion pips, Sir Omar Carmenates.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm happy to take questions as they come. So feel free. You don't have to wait till the question segments to ask. But what I wanted to talk about first was arranging for keyboard percussion instruments inside inside a concert hall, and how that's a little different from composing and arranging for keyboard instruments outside. And I'll be doing it through, as you heard Lexter say in my bio, this really long, it's almost a decade now, project I've had of arranging the music of John Sothis, who is New Zealand's sort of foremost composer, of arranging his music, his orchestral music, his chamber music for percussion instruments. You heard a little bit. You heard a little bit of his music actually in the video. That's one of his pieces called "Coolish Sign," which I had a chance to premiere this past fall via video. Um, and I've known John for over a decade now, and worked closely with him to commission works from him, but also to arrange his music for percussion instruments. Um, so a little bit about John. Here is, like I mentioned, he is New Zealand's foremost composer. He's worked with some really incredible musicians, including Michael Brecker, Joshua Redman, who are jazz saxophonists, and had a Billboard topping album with Serge Tankian, who you might know as the lead singer of the rock band System of a Down. He collaborated with him to write orchestral arrangements for his music. He's written movie soundtracks, full symphonies. He wrote music for the Olympics back in 2004, I believe, when they were in Greece. So it's been a pleasure to work with him on this project throughout. So, like I mentioned, the John Sothis Percussion Project, me and my friends, we call it JP3, is a multi-year collaboration to reimagine or rearrange John's compositional catalog entirely for percussion instruments. So the idea spawned from a piece of his that I actually arranged for a keyboard percussion trio, and it was originally for piano and gamelan. It's called Waiting Still. And when I was getting the CD together, I sent the arrangement to John, and he liked it so much that he asked if I wanted to actually write some more of his pieces or rearrange some more of his pieces for percussion. So that's the start of the project. So here's just a little clip. I'll just play a little bit of that original arrangement of Waiting Still. Maybe. Here we go. Great. I think I might have muted the music. Sorry about it. I muted my mic, so you wouldn't hear me. Apologies about that. But a little bit about the project itself. We basically imagined it as a 2 CD project to record these works. You can see all of the pieces here on the window. I hope you can see my cursor. You can see the original pieces here, and then what they will become. So these are the original instrumentations. You see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for the first CD, and then 4 for the second. The second CD is not quite finished yet, but we will be soon. And then this is what the new instrumentation became. So, for instance, Jettatura was originally for piano solo, the third one down on the left column, and that became a duo for 2 percussionists playing 2 keyboards. Aegean was originally a string trio, Aegean and chorus, and those differently became, even though they're for the same original instrumentation, became a mallet quartet and a percussion sextet. I'll talk about that one, chorus, in a little bit. And then on the right, we have some concertos, so a soloist plus an orchestra. And I kept all the solo parts, but arranged the orchestra part for a big percussion orchestra. So like 4 marimbas, 3 vibraphones. And so you can see just the first big step was deciding what instruments to reduce the arrangements to or expand at some points. So a little bit about how to do that, how to take a piece that exists as another in another form, whether it's a string quartet or a piano quintet or solo piano, and how to choose how to take that and turn it into percussion instruments. So here are some things to think about. First is arranging versus transcribing. These are 2 different things in my view. This was something that was said to me by one of my teachers, which always stuck with me, in that when you transcribe something, you're literally just taking a note for note. You're taking an A flat over here and you're making it an A flat, in the new arrangement. It's just a transcription. You're literally not changing anything. You're just moving it over. When you arrange, you're actually moving some things around or adding or taking away things to make it work, to make the piece work in the new version. So that would be like percussion for us. And that was what I considered myself doing for all of these pieces, was arranging. It was always my goal to make it sound like the piece had been written for percussion first. So that was sort of my goal, not to make it sound like, oh, this, was a string quartet, but it became a mallet quartet, and it was actually better as a string quartet. I didn't want anybody to say that. So I wanted to make sure that the pieces felt at home and felt like, yeah, they always belonged as a percussion piece. Another thing to think about is range issues. Of those of you that play keyboard instruments, you know that if you have a marimba with an A on the bottom, you can't go any lower than that. You can't detune the marimba bar to make it an A flat. So, for instance, when writing for piano, a piano has 88 keys. Our biggest marimba only has 66. So I was always dealing with range issues, how to take those instruments that exist, how to take those notes that exist outside of our instruments and find a way to squeeze them in to fit on our instruments. Then the other thing is adding or changing colors. Obviously, John is a fantastic composer. I wanted to make sure I was very respectful of his pieces, and I recommend anybody that arranges music, whether you do it for marching band or for concert percussion or whatever, when you add or change something, just always make sure it's in the spirit of being respectful of the original work. That you really study the piece, so that when you feel like when you add a new color or you take something away, that it feels at home in the new piece. It feels like it belongs. And then this is something that was big for me, especially in this project, is what I call 1-to-1 writing versus color equivalency. I'll talk about that in another slide later. But that basically is like, if you're writing for a string quartet, if you're arranging a string quartet, 1-to-1 writing would be like just copying the violin 1 part, taking violin 1 and copy pasting it to marimba 1. Violin 2, you copy over to marimba 2. Maybe violin, viola, the viola part, maybe you just turn into another marimba part, and then bass, the cello, maybe you just turn it into a fourth marimba part. So that's one-to-one writing versus color equivalency, which is basically saying what sound in percussion is the best representation of that sound in a string quartet. So if it's a harmonic on strings, what does that sound like, and what is the best equivalency of that in percussion land? You know, maybe it's a bowed vibraphone, maybe it's a bowed glockenspiel, maybe it's a bowed cymbal. You know, there are lots of options there, and things I tried to do is that color equivalency writing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then the next thing is instrument limitations and extended techniques. Percussion instruments, I think you're all here because you love percussion. You know, we know what they're good at. There are some things that they are amazing at, rhythm, you know, playing with energy, volume, but there are some things that they're not good at. Keyboard instruments especially, sustain, you know, not as good as other instruments, I should say. You know, we can roll, we can play chorales, but we can't sustain like a string instrument can, right? So I was always overcoming those kinds of limitations. And then extended techniques, when to try crazy things on percussion instruments to get the sound that I thought was needed. You know, when to try hitting a vibraphone with a drumstick instead of a mallet, things like that. And then technical possibility. Is this thing even playable on percussion instruments? You know, if there's a piano part that has on the left hand, you know, maybe an octave and a third, and then another octave and a third in the right hand, that's really hard for marimba players, for keyboard players. So how do we make that possible on our instruments? So those are all things I was considering as I'm arranging anything, but particularly as I was arranging John's music. So I'm going to dive into some specific pieces from here, and I have some examples, audio examples, and there's a little SoundCloud link up on the upper right side. If the audio is not coming through, you can listen there, or you can use the link that you see on the screen to download all these resources for you as well. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is Drum Dances. This piece is very energetic. It's originally for piano and drum set, and basically, which is an interesting combination because the drum set part is written out note for note. Normally that's not traditional. Normally a drum set player improvises, but the drum set part is written out note for note, and the piano part is very, very, very difficult. And so, and it exists almost always in the low and the high register of the piano. So there were some challenges there in that all of those notes don't exist on keyboard instruments. So here is a little snippet of the original score for Drum Dances. And in it, you'll see, you could probably see my cursor, it looks like, right here. You have a bunch of B flats. And then right down here, these B flats here, boom, boom, bum, bing, bum, 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 bing. Those B flats don't exist on the marimba. And what I found myself doing, if I kept this in the same key, this B flat, which it sits on for a very, very long time, was not available. A 5-octave marimba doesn't have that B flat. So I actually ended up moving the whole thing up a step to C. So I transposed it to C, and that gave me at least this note here. This B flat became a C, and I had that. And then I had to do something what I called octave compression, which is I took these 3 notes right here and compressed them inwards so that this C, this low B flat became this C and this C, and then these stayed where they were. So you can see the score example right here. So the measures don't line up exactly, but here's the equivalent part. So you can see here, this goes up, boom, bum, bum. I had to compress that down to keep it down on the low end down here, bum, 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 right? And so that, after transposing and compressing it, it at least kept that riff down at the bottom end of the keyboard instrument so that it wasn't interfering with all this stuff going on here. These I call them backbeats, these chords on beat 3. So here's a little audio example of that. So you can hear a little bit of the original version, and then a little bit of the new version. You can hear they're a step off, a step apart. And the original effect mainly stayed the same, even though the direction of these notes right here changed a little bit. So that's what I call octave compression. Trying to make it fit, just trying to make it fit on the instruments. That was the biggest challenge of this whole piece. The next thing is adding color, right? When to add things that were not in the original piece. So I'm going to talk about the piece Choribas, which was originally a string trio. That's 2 violins, cello, and piano. And this piece is a lot of fun for a percussionist because it's in a lot of different meters. It starts in 5/4, and it goes into a little bit of 7/8. But then one of the biggest sections is in 17/8. It's 2/4 6/8. I'm going to forget 2/4 6/8 7/8. I believe is the bar cycle, but it's that equals up to 17/8. And this is a Macedonian dance rhythm that John sort of discovered. And in this piece, you heard the original is, here's the score, is for piano. Oh, I'm sorry. String trio meaning, sorry, 1 violin, 1 violin, 1 cello, 1 piano. Sorry, it's still early for me. My brain's not working all the way. But you have violin, cello, and piano here. So that's the original instrumentation. Nowhere in there is percussion at all in this piece. It's 13 minutes long. There is no percussion in it. So there were, however, since the piece is so rhythmic, I decided to add percussion to it. So there is an extra percussion part. So here is the new score. This is my score. I rescored this for 2 vibraphones, 3 marimbas, and a percussion part down here at the bottom. And basically, the piano part gets interspersed throughout all the keyboard instruments. The string parts get interspersed throughout all the keyboard instruments. And then I just added this percussion part. So down here, this person's playing, we recorded it on a doumbek, but I left the option open to record it on any sort of Middle Eastern drum or Greek drum. So here's a little bit of that, this section. So that is very subtle. That's kind of quiet. I hope you heard it. It's just a very doom, just outlining the meter. And the main reason for that is because later on in the piece, the percussion part gets really powerful. So I wanted to make sure that the percussion wasn't overtaking the original melodic material that's now in the keyboard parts, right? So this part, if you know John's music, you've probably heard a piece called Kyoto by John. It's his first percussion ensemble piece. He wrote it for a mallet quartet plus a percussionist. And there's this really prominent tom-tom part. Players like flying all around the toms. And so in my opinion, the loudest, most powerful part of Choribas, which is right here at letter X, I decided to pay homage to John's Kyoto tom part and write my own part that sounds, that I wanted to sound like John wrote it. I didn't want to sound like I wrote it. So down here is a tom part that I added on top of scoring all this stuff, all this melodic material here. I added this tom part. So here's a little bit of the tom part. I want to make sure that in Kyoto, the toms were very melodic. They traced the melody in the keyboard percussion. They were always sort of following it. So I made sure that the tom part here did that too. Again, so it sounded like John wrote it and not me. It sounded like it was in his style. So here's a little example of that. Okay. So you see the tom part's working melodic. It's not an ostinato. It's not like a drum set part or anything, a timekeeper. It's a melody part just as much as any of the other parts. So I kind of treated it like a keyboard instrument was the goal. Okay, now this color equivalency thing that I mentioned before, one-to-one writing versus color equivalency. There is this other piece that I arranged, Matra's Dance, which is one of John's more famous solos from the 90s. This is sort of his first big hit, as it were. It's written for a percussionist playing 6 drums and piano. And it was championed by Evelyn Glennie. Those of you that know her, she toured it nationally and sort of gave John his first break, with international prominence with his pieces. And so in this, the very beginning, actually, the first thing is just right here in the piano. These notes, which don't exist, we have this low C, but we we have this low C, but then we have right here this note that's out of our range. So I knew I had to move that up, but the original, those strings down there in the piano, that low end piano, they're really gritty. They kind of have like a rumble to them, like, they have a lot of grit. And the way you have to play this piano part, because you're playing with toms, is very, very powerful. So it's a very rumbly, gritty piano part. And when I was first writing this, I had one marimba playing that part. So I moved this up an octave, and I had one marimba playing bum, bum, boom, bum, boom, bum, bum, boom, bum, bum. And it didn't sound, it sounded right in terms of that the pitches were there, and the notes were there. Everything that had to be there was there, but it didn't have the right character or the right color, going back to the term up here, the right color. So if I was just writing one-to-one, yeah, I copied the piano part to a marimba, job done, right? No, it doesn't sound right. It didn't feel like it belonged. So what I actually ended up doing was putting 2 marimbas on this part in unison, which is usually a big no-no in concert percussion, is writing a ton of unison, because it's very hard to clean. It's very hard to play together, especially when a part is this syncopated. It's got so much syncopation. There's going to be, it's going to be hard to coordinate those 2 players. But what ended up happening is those little tiny imperfections, the little flams, the little things that happen when you have 2 players playing like this, actually ended up being kind of nice. They actually ended up adding a little bit of that grit to the piano part, right? So that low end piano string sound actually became real thick and full with 2 marimbas playing. So here's a little bit of that. You'll hear a little bit of the piano part and a little bit of the marimba part. And so again, those little tiny imperfections, they're just tiny, they add a lot. Even the instruments just being not exactly in tune with each other adds a little bit of that grittiness that you needed for what those low piano strings sounded like in the original. Okay. And so the next thing, and this is something, again, we're all percussionists here. We all love our instruments. We're generally not very good at sustaining. Right? We hit a marimba note or a vibraphone note, and it'll ring as long as it rings, and that's about as much sustain as we get. We fake it by like rolling or bowing or other things, but we generally are not as good at sustain as brass instruments, wind instruments, and string instruments are. So in this piece here, Planet Damnation, and some of you may know this is this timpani concerto. What I did, these are brass chords. You can see that they're just sustaining. Nothing terribly interesting. There's a little crescendo here. And when I originally wrote this, I wrote them as rolls. And the problem is in other parts of the score in the same spot, there's a lot of instruments. There's a lot of other rhythms going on. There's some 16th notes and some other things happening over this. And so when I think it was the marimbas originally were rolling, it got in the way of those 16ths. It sort of sounded like they were clashing with each other, because they were going da 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 da, and then the 16ths were going da 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 da, and so they stepped on each other. And so what I decided to do was what I call rhythmicizing the sustain. What that means is taking those same chords and just writing a 16th note version of them. So this chord I just stacked up on a staff, and then they just played 16th note versions of these. So it goes, instead of going da, now it goes, which marimbas are great at, right? Marimbas and vibraphones, we love going like da 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 da, and it sounds great, and it sounds at home on the instruments. So that's what I did here. So let me play a little audio example here. Again, so instead of sustaining, I just wrote these little 16th note pads, which sound better on keyboard instruments than just sustaining themselves, right? Those tremolos would have been lost, and they would have gotten in the way of all these other 16th note lines, and the snare drum line and the timpani stuff happening would have gotten in the way. So I just wrote a complementary part in the same harmonies here. And then the last thing in terms of writing for keyboard percussion instruments here is extended techniques, like when to try something crazy on keyboard instruments. So there was this piece, Piano Quintet, which had this violin solo, which, as you can tell by the music here, and sorry, I had to like cut up the score here to scan it, is very tricky. You've got microtones all over the place. Where are they? You've got pitch bends here. You've got some more microtones here, some notes between notes, like F, something that's between an F and an F sharp. You got these pitch bends, all these directions like sul ponticello and other things. Here, sul ponticello, ordinal or ordinary, sul ponticello again, which is like playing on different parts of the bridge of the violin to get like different kind of string effects. This was all very it would not fit on a keyboard instrument. Basically, I told John, I said, this is impossible. I'm not gonna be able to do this. But instead, I actually took some time and created a version of it that uses some extended techniques in the vibraphone. But first, here's the original violin part. Oops, sorry. And here's the vibraphone part. Sorry. And then there's, I miscued my audio here. And here's the new vibraphone part. Okay, so I'm going back a little bit. You can see, basically it looks similar, but what I did was I actually did some extended techniques on the vibraphone. So where sul ponticello is asked on the violin, which is playing on a different part of the bridge, I have them play on the nodes, which is usually a big no-no, playing over the strings, over the part of the bar that has the string going through it. I had them play the performer play there to get a really thin sound, right? And then there's pitch bending here, where you have to hold a xylophone mallet or a rubber mallet and push it into the bar after you play a note to get the pitch to bend down. So there's a little bit of that. I had them play on the node lightly with the xylophone mallet right here. That was very lightly, just a ping, to make it sound like a glockenspiel almost. And then this technique, which I borrowed from composer Jamie Whitmarsh, who's a friend of mine, the side harmonic. If you all want to try this next time you're on a vibraphone, if you take, if this is a vibraphone bar, right, and you play here on the bar on the side with a xylophone mallet, it actually has a real nice harmonics, and it sounds very high, almost sounds like a ghost glockenspiel. And so it's a really nice effect there. So let me back up and play you the version of the version of the solo that goes between the violin and the vibraphone, so you can hear them together. And then, just so you can kind of see, here is the whole vibraphone solo. It's a little quiet, so make sure you turn up your volume, because it's just a sensitive part here. But here's the whole vibraphone solo with the sheet music here, so you can kind of see everything that the performer is doing. And I'll move my cursor along too as well. And I see Ryan putting in the chat here. If you can't hear that, there's a link there. You can download all these audio files and all these slides, so you can hear these on your own time as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about the John Sothis project. There is a Parma Recordings, who's releasing the CDs, has a playlist on YouTube. Volume 1, the Volume 1 CD is out. You can listen to it on Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, Tidal, whatever you use. And the scores are slowly being released through Promethean Editions. I think most of them are out now. So you can get those if you want to play them or study them. Volume 2 will be coming soon. Hopefully we have our last recording this summer. And then maybe a year from then we'll be ready to release Volume 2 on CD. So I'll happy to pause for any questions if there are any as well, for just a moment before I move into arranging for keyboard percussion outside.
Okay. Maybe I could ask the question first. Hello?
What, sorry?
Yeah. Maybe I can ask the question first. I could ask questions.
Please. Yeah, go ahead.
We all know that composing a percussion piece is challenging because of repetition of patterns and the color and the materials that we use. Usually, we just hear some rhythmic patterns, right? So sometimes we can classify the common parts of the composition, the A part and B part, and also I would like to ask, what is the most challenging part in composing usually in elaborating patterns and more attractive, or let's say because if usually if the composition is just a repetition of patterns, it becomes boring, right? Just repeating and repeating. So how can you maintain the peak or the excitement of the composition?
Yeah, there's two. I have two parts, I guess, to answer that. The first is something I actually learned from John Sothis, this composer. His pieces are very often are groove based. They repeat a lot. But the way he writes, he doesn't write on paper first. He writes in a computer. He plays the parts and records them into a computer. Um, so what ends up happening for a lot of his percussion music is that there'll be a feel that repeats, but the part itself never repeats. So it may be it's always changing and always varying. Even though it sort of has this kind of feel. So it's not just copy paste. It's not just you write a bar and then you just hit repeat. Um, so being very judicious with repeats, I think, helps. Sometimes as a composer, especially if you're in a hurry, it feels like it's easy to just repeat, you know. But maybe you repeat 3 bars, and on the fourth bar you change the pattern, and then you repeat 3 bars, and on the fourth bar you add a new one, and then you repeat 3 bars, and that helps keep the interest of that repeating pattern. It makes it sound like it's more natural, like how a person would play it. Like if you sat down behind the drum set, um, you would have little ghost notes and little things that, even though the part might just go doomed, cat, doomed, cat, it might just be that. There are little things that every performer adds to make things sound like they have forward energy. Doomed, cat, cat, doomed, cat, cat. They always add little spices, little things of flavor. Um, so composing that in, I think helps, and John's very good at that. The other thing too that I think is also very important is knowing where you are in the form of a piece. Are you at the beginning of an idea? Are you at the peak of an idea? Are you somewhere in between? Are you developing an idea? And if you have something that repeats, you need to make sure that when it's repeating, it feels like it's going in that direction. So if you're getting more energy, it can't just be it can't just do that, right?
Yeah.
If the piece is meant to be growing, it should go and should grow um, with the piece. It shouldn't just be a repeat, you know. So I do run into a lot of pieces that I've played, and maybe you've played too, where the whole ensemble feels like they're growing, but
Yeah.
your part's just right? So you have to
Like
change it on the fly. You have to like
ostinato, right?
yeah, you have to add a crescendo, or you have to add something so that it feels like it belongs in the piece, you know. So compositionally, I always try to do that when I write to make sure that that's built in.
Yeah. Wow, that's a nice answer, and it really answers my questions. My
Yeah,
question, yeah,
no problem. Anything
yeah.
else or
John, Jason, you want to ask anything?
Well, at the moment, I don't have any questions. But, um, maybe we can go to the next topic. John, do you have any other question?
No, I don't have any question.
Okay.
oh I actually see one in the chat.
Yeah.
Um,
I can read it for you
mhm.
from Satur. So he's asking if is there a difference of arranging in a percussion ensemble and pit percussion?
Yes, there's a big one. It is huge. And to the question, to the person who asked it, I'm actually the next part of this. I'll be talking about writing for pit percussion,
All right.
front ensemble, whatever you want to call it. But what I will say is the thing I'm always thinking about is projection. How well can the part that I'm writing, whether it's the fourth marimba part or a chime part or a little triangle part, how well can that be heard, right? In concert percussion inside, that job is a little easier
Yeah.
because you have a roof over you, things resonate, and uh, th- the quiet sounds are easy to hear. Outdoors, there's no roof, there's no walls. You're on a football field or a soccer field or whatever, and the sounds just go off into the air. They just wisp away. So a tiny little triangle note doesn't sound very good. You can hear it, but it sounds kind of like, it kind of just sounds like a little tink. So you have to reinforce it with something else, another triangle, a glockenspiel note, you have to add something that sounds similar to it to help it project, right? To help it travel farther with no roof, with no walls. Um, and so I'm always thinking about projection, and I have certain techniques I do to make sure that those project well.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we can move on to the second part of your
Yeah,
talk.
great. And yeah, to the person who asked that question, hopefully the next part goes into more detail as well about that. Great. So I'll go ahead and move into the next section. Yep. Thank you, Ryan, for pulling up my slides. Um, the next part here is doing the same thing that I just talked about, arranging for and composing for marching percussion, but talking about the keyboard instruments. The battery instruments are usually, I'm a battery person at heart. I marched drum corps on tenors. I was a battery kid in high school. I became a front ensemble person somewhere along the way. I do both, but I have a strong affinity for writing for um, keyboard percussion as well. I got a little bit of this chopped off here. Um, so the xylophone, I'm gonna go through quickly each instrument and talk about how each instrument functions. So this one here is the xylophone and the glockenspiel. And the xylophone and the Glock here, I think of as the soprano of a choir, or the lead trumpet of a big band, or the center snare of a snare line. Basically, they are the highest, usually most piercing sound, most definable sound. And so, if you think about the keyboards outside as a choir, this glockenspiel and the xylophone are your soprano instruments. They have higher frequencies than the others. So what it does is those instruments give focus and articulation to the keyboard choir sound. So it acts like the front of the note, basically, right? So but that comes with something to consider. Due to the fact that those sounds really cut and they really get heard, the xylophone and the Glock may actually play less than the insides of the choir, the marimbas and the vibraphones, because they're always very exposed and they have to be very consistently and reliably played. I always try to put my best players on xylophone and glockenspiel, because when that person plays, you hear it. It's like if you're playing in the back of an orchestra and you crash a pair of cymbals. If you're just a little bit behind the beat or a little bit ahead of the beat, everyone knows. It's sort of the same thing here on xylophone and on glockenspiel. So here's a little bit of a xylophone and a Glock part. This is played by one player. So here's xylophone, and then that person changes to glockenspiel. From the Cadets 2019 show that I had the chance to write the front ensemble book for. And what you'll hear is this intro, and then you'll hear this unison run. Here, the xylophone will play with the marimbas, and then the glockenspiel will play with the vibraphones. And what you can hear is how those instruments just give a little bit of front to the note, like contact sound. Like you can hear the articulations very cleanly, right? So here's that video. So it's very critical on these fast passages that there is xylophone on them, right? Or if you don't have a xylophone, a marimba at the high register, at the high end, so that there's something high and something very that has a lot of contact sound that you can listen to. Same with the glockenspiel. If you don't have a glockenspiel, crotales work. A vibraphone in the high register, where everyone else is maybe an octave down, that will help as well. So the marimba. So I think of the marimba often as like the snare drum of like what a snare drum is to a battery section. Um, I think of that as the marimba is the snare drum of the keyboard ensemble, because it has a short articulation, especially outside. It's bum, That's about as long as the note gets. Bum. So you can play runs on them, and they sound very clear. And it has a big range, which is great. It's often very tempting to use the whole range of a marimba if you have a low A marimba, to go down there in the bass clef and to score all the way up to the highest C. But like a clarinetists have different names for different parts of their register. The Chalumeau register, and because the different parts of the clarinet have different sound qualities. I try to think of the marimba like that, meaning you have to understand how the low register, how the middle register, and how the high register sound outside, and be able to use those very appropriately. I see so many performers overplaying the low end because they think it's big and powerful when it actually isn't. Outside, okay. So using each register of the marimba appropriately, again, outside. The high register is very articulate, like a xylophone, but the bars, if you've stood behind a marimba before, those bars are very small. The high C is maybe this big, and so because of that, it's kind of thin sounding. So it doesn't project very well, but it is very articulate. So if you're going to play up in that register, you need other marimbas playing the same thing in the middle register, an octave down or 2 octaves down, to provide what I think is the best projecting register of the marimba, the middle, right? Middle C and up an octave and a half or so, maybe 2 octaves. It's an articulate sound. It's not very articulate like the high register, but it's articulate, and it's also very focused. It's like when we think of a marimba in marching band, that's probably the sound we hear, is the middle register. Okay, the low register, it is warm, it has a longer articulation, but outside, I just find it really doesn't project well by itself, because the bars, if you look at the side of a marimba bar, it's very thin in the middle, right? And it's a very long bar, so there's a lot of thinness in the bars. So it's really important to not overwrite and to not overplay this register outside. Okay, if you're going to have a marimba down there, you need another marimba up an octave in the middle register to add the articulation. You can't just play louder down there and have it and think it'll project. You're just going to have what I call diminishing returns. Like the louder you play, almost the quieter it gets, right? So this clip here is another clip from the Cadets 2019 show, and it's from the ballad, and it goes over the entire marimba. And what I hope you'll hear is look at the registers they're playing in. You'll see that the most of it is in the middle register, but the high and low register are really only used for effect, right? If you want something like high and thin, it'll be down there. If you just want a warm, long bass note, then that's down there. But it really doesn't, most of it's in the middle. Okay, here we go. Oh, sorry. So you can see most of it's in the middle, just little effects on the outside. And if you had a sharp eye, you might have seen some marimba players were down an octave at certain points to add some warmth, just like I was talking about. I wanted some low register, but I kept most of the players in the middle to keep the articulate focus sound that register is best in. So back to my other point about not overwriting in the low register, I'm going to admit a mistake. And here is an example from the Cadets 2018 show where I had a lot happening in the low register. And had I had the chance to go back and do it again, I would probably move it all up a little bit. So you can see here, this stuff here is drums. They have drums attached to the marimbas, but all this stuff here is bass clef. All of this. It goes into treble clef for a little bit, and then goes back to bass clef, and there's just a lot of rumbliness down there, and it ended up sounding kind of nice on a computer, but in practice, it was a little brittle and a little heavy-handed. So here's a little example of what I think is a mistake that I made, of scoring too much in the low register. So getting the cue to just go ahead here. So thanks for your patience. Sorry about that technical issue. Had a little audio issue. Hopefully my video didn't cause it. But anyway, so I'm going to pick up here right where I left off. So this is this audio section. Again, if you download the files, you can listen to all the files here, but that's an example of a spot where you can hear where a lot of the low end stuff is lost behind all the cymbals and whatnot, and particularly behind the brass are still playing and the percussion are still playing. So I would have moved that up a little bit. But let's talk about the vibraphone now. This is my favorite instrument. I feel like if I died and went to heaven, there would be a vibraphone there. And so, you know, to me, the reason I like the vibraphone so much is that it's the most versatile keyboard in the front ensemble because of its metal bars, because they ring. So you have a lot more options in terms of articulation, in terms of how long or short you want to note. And with the damper pedal, you have, again, just lots of options for color. It's often treated in marching band land. It's often treated as a secondary instrument to the marimba. I don't know why, but I try not to do that. It's a smaller instrument than the marimba, which may be why. But I think if you ever seen Gary Burton play vibraphone, he does not need more notes on the keyboard. He does just fine with the 3 octaves that they have. That's because of how many options and how good he is at note length and articulation, right? So for a marching band, I just find it really important to make use of those things. Also, the metal bars are just more durable. You know, they project better. They don't break as often as marimba bars outside, right? So when the trick is with all those possibilities, when composing for vibraphone, it's really important that you're specific with pedal articulations and note length. I see a lot of players that just push the pedal down and then play. And then when they're done playing, they lift the pedal up, right? So play, not playing, playing, not playing. And there's a lot more possibility there when we play. So my thing is I actually default, if there's nothing on the score that says anything about note length, that to me is defaulting to the pedal up, meaning muted. And then you only press the pedal down when you need to. Okay, so important note here is that even when the damper bar is up, a single vibraphone note, if you just hit a note, is a little longer than the same note on a marimba. That means when you write fast notes on vibraphone, you have to be very careful how much you do it because it can get pretty washy pretty quick. Many dampening options exist on the vibraphone, including using the pedal, including using dead strokes. Like, so you hit a note, you just leave the mallet in there. And then mallet dampening, where you hit a note, then you hit another note, and you mute the previous note you hit with your mallet. Sort of like Indonesian gamelan or something, where you have to mute the notes after you hit them. I use these all the time. When I write, when I play, I try to write it in as much as possible. So you can see in this example, all the green things are notation examples. Here's a little X that has an X, meaning you mute this D when you play this C with your mallet. Here's a slur mark I use for pedaling. So you pedal here, you play a dead stroke here on this F sharp so it doesn't ring against that G. Here's another mallet dampening. You mute this C out when you play that B, right? So those are things I use all the time, and I try to write them in. I try to write very detailed vibraphone parts. So here's the same part. This is again from the Cadets 2019 show. And unfortunately, the vibraphones are in the back row in this video, so you just have to watch them here. But this is a really nice moment for the vibraphones if you want to follow along, and you can see all that dampening at work. Now, it's very subtle, right? But when you have 6 vibraphones in this case, in the Cadets, we had 6. If you have 2 or 3, those little things really add up to make some really clear vibraphone scoring that you can hear very nicely, right? So dampening, use it a lot. Okay, it really helps. a lot. So moving on a little bit. Here are another video of the Cadets 2018 production drum solo called Demonic Thesis, which is actually another piece by John Sothis. And so you can kind of see like the technical possibilities of what's possible on a vibraphone outside, right? I was really proud of this vibraphone part because of how detailed it was, and hopefully you see that. So here's a little bit of that. Yeah, so just a lot of what's possible on the vibraphone there. I saw this question pop up in the chat. On average, how many separate parts are there in a pit ensemble? Does each performer have a custom piece, or there are occasions where two or more players may be playing a generic marimba one part? I'll talk to that in just a moment. This is something that's very important to me, and I have a whole slide dedicated to it, so I'll bring it up. I'll bring it up in a moment. Thank you, though, for asking that question. So really quick, I know these aren't keyboard instruments, but let me just talk about the timpani. These are very important. I think if you have the option, you should have a timpani, even if it's just one or two drums, because they are a bass instrument and they can fill out the weak parts of the marimba voice. They can sit down in that low register where the marimbas are generally weaker and add a lot of projection and focus. So they just provide options for grooves and time as well. They can play a groove, they can play tempo rather than just having it be on your accessory percussion. So when you're writing for timpani, it's important to know your ranges. You have all this in your slides, so I'm just going to skip this for time. And so I'm not going to play this whole video, but here's a little bit of what I'm talking about, how the timpani part can fill out that low end. So there's a little bit of that. And then the accessory percussion, again, this is a keyboard clinic, I understand, but I think it's really important that you use accessory percussion instruments well. Unlike a band or an orchestra, the accessory percussion's in the front of the ensemble, which means that every sound they make can be heard. Whether or not it's good or not is a different thing. But they can, so if you put down a tambourine and the jingles accidentally hit the table, you know, if you have a triangle that you're playing it not with the greatest technique, those sounds get heard, right? So you have to use those sounds sparingly, and you have to make sure that you write for them very carefully and that they're played very well, right? I'm going to skip that really quick. So right here, what to write. So we'll talk about how to write with that user's question in a moment, but it's really important that you understand how to write for styles of music, right? When you're writing, you know, you want to make sure that when you hear a band, a marching band playing on the field, that you can sort of suspend disbelief for a second and think that you're listening to a big band or a funk band or a rock band or whatever the genre is. It has to sound right. So you really have to, on top of knowing what to write, you have to know how to write. You have to understand the rhythmic and harmonic vocabulary so that what you write sounds at home in the music. So here's a little example of the Spirit of Atlanta Front Ensemble playing some jazz. And if and I'll just let it go. Here you go.
Assistance during the event should notify new rescue Roosevelt Stadium staff members. Be sure to visit the DCI Festival Marketplace located inside the East Entrance Gate and throughout the Roosevelt Stadium lobby for a variety of general, international, and liquor containers, weapons, vuvuzelas, audio recorders, video recorders,
And I'll stop it right there. You can see that's a lot of different styles. There's like gangster jazz, like spy music right there at the very end. There was upbeat ragtime and some really fast double time, like almost bebop, early bebop, and so I had to understand those languages so that when I wrote for it, it sounded natural, right? So then to the Facebook user's question here, once you know what to write, you have to know how to write it and how to orchestrate. And this is the most important step, if you ask me, when writing for keyboard percussion instruments, because you have to make sure that no matter what you write, you can write the best things in the world, but if the writing isn't clear, it's not going to be successful. Orchestration that isn't the greatest is usually too thick or has too many layers, or that doesn't set the performers up for success, meaning it's too hard, it's written in it's written on like parts of the keyboard that don't project well, and those things can ruin even the best musical ideas. So my rules are generally keep it clear, keep it simple, trust your ears and not your computer. So what I mean by that is you have to score for projection and color. You have to make sure you have to make sure every phrase gets heard, and then you have to make sure that you don't use everything all the time. So if you have a marimba and a vibraphone and a glockenspiel and crotales and accessory percussion and timpani and ride cymbals and everything else, that you don't just write for all of that all the time, because if you paint with all of your colors all the time, you get black, and it's always black, rather than a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red and a little bit of blue. When you project, keyboard instruments are usually softer than brass and battery instruments. So for this reason, to the Facebook user's question here, it's really important that you score in unison style or 2D style, where maybe all the marimbas are playing together the same part. All the vibraphones are playing together the same part. This is like 70, 80% of what being a front ensemble arranger does. The trick is how they play in unison. They can play at an octave. So you can have one player up an octave, 4 players down. You can have one player up an octave, 3 players in the middle, and 1 player an octave down from there. How you split those parts is sort of the secret sauce there, but they should really be playing in unison so that they're projecting and reinforcing each other. So one of my last slides here is just the projection hierarchy for keyboards, meaning what are the loudest things you can write for in keyboard in front ensemble pit percussion, and what are the softest things. So the loudest are cymbals and accessories. Those generally cut the most. Bass drums. All of your keyboards in unison with your center player up an octave, and then with xylophone and Glock playing as well, and that be sounding up an octave, so it'll be written in the same part because they transpose. The next one down, all keyboards in unison with your centers up an octave, and a few marimbas or vibraphones could be down an octave from there, right? It's thicker sounding, but because of all the octave displacement, it's not quite as loud. It's close. It's just not quite as projecting. Everyone in unison in the same octave. That's very clear. Sounds great. But because you don't have that top voice like a xylophone, it might not cut as much as you want. Then everyone playing in rhythmic unison playing the same part, but harmonized at a fifth or a fourth. Everyone in rhythmic unison harmonized at a third or a sixth. Section unisons, meaning just marimbas, just vibraphones, or just woods, just metals. Split scoring, pairs of players side by side, and then individual players. So what this question was asking here, does everyone have a different part? I only do that if nobody else, and if the brass aren't playing, if the battery isn't playing, and the moment really calls for it, I might do some individual scoring. I will not do it if the brass are playing or the winds are playing at all, because it just won't get heard. And if it does get heard, it's gonna be kind of dinky. Okay. Last thing here is here's a video that you can watch, and it's just 1 minute or so. Watch each section, and watch for all of these techniques that I've talked about. Watch for how the colors change from phrase to phrase. It's not everybody playing all the time. And watch to see how generally each section is playing in unison, or how different orchestration techniques like these, how those sort of show they're all used. Sometimes it's just cymbals, sometimes it's everyone in unison, sometimes there's harmonies, sometimes there's section unisons and split scoring. And so pay attention to that and see how that relates to the full score when the brass are playing, when the battery are playing. This is from the Cadets 2019 opener. So here you go. So there you have it. That's just a little bit about my arranging styles and techniques and things I consider. And when I'm writing both for concert percussion and for marching percussion. So thank you for your patience with the little technical difficulty there in the middle, and for hanging out for what has a little bit. I'm happy to take any questions or anything the hosts want to do.
Yeah, that was a really interesting topic, sir. And we really learned a lot regarding how to expound your composition, especially on percussion, because it's really difficult on our part to, for example, if we're on an open pit, how can be heard, right?
Hmm.
Like for example, the vibraphones. It's like how many vibraphones are needed so that it can be heard clearly, and for the timpani, for the bass lines, and what mallet should be used, and all of the stuff. So we really need to know all of the stuff, and we really need to explore, right? We really need to explore the sounds if it really produce clear sounds, whether it's indoor or outdoor. So we have a really lot of factors to consider.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing. I know all my videos that I showed had like 4 or 5 marimbas, 4 or 5 vibraphones, six
Yeah.
vibraphones. They were big. You don't need that. The I love writing for small groups. Maybe one marimba, one vibraphone, and a timpanist. I've written for that, and that can be just as effectively heard in an outdoor pit if you write for it correctly. If you write for it knowing that if you write for a marimba part and a vibraphone part and a timpani part, and they're all different in that setting, it's not going to work, right? But if you write all of them as one voice and you just sort of score it out, like maybe the timpani always plays the bass notes, but the marimba and vibraphone play in unison, then they have a better chance of being heard, especially when the winds are playing behind them. Um, so those are all, yeah, really important considerations. It doesn't have to be a big group. I know that all my videos were, but I love writing for small groups as well.
I got a question. Is it possible for a pit percussion to have an instrumentation of one percussion instrument each? Like for example, one marimba, one xylophone, one vibraphone, and one snare, and so on. Is it possible that it can be heard?
Yeah, you just got to write for it correctly. You just have to understand that the marimba and the vibraphone will probably play in unison most of the time. In that regard, you generally won't split them up because if you do that, then it becomes two solos and not two people playing the same thing. Um, so you have to save those. If you're going to do that, you have to save it for very, very intimate or very small moments. Maybe no one else is playing and it's just a solo. Then it might work. But yeah, you just have to use your resources correctly. Some of the best shows I've ever seen and judged, and the ones I've enjoyed the most, are not necessarily the big groups or the small groups. It's when they're done well and written for very well.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, thank you, Jason and John. You have any questions?
I do have a question.
Hmm.
Have you ever? I was just curious if you ever composed for like a front ensemble, but there are two players in one marimba, or like
Hmm.
two players in a vibraphone, or anything like that. Like,
Yeah, I've done it a lot with two players on a marimba. Not so much the vibraphone because you have to share the pedal. That makes it
that's
tricky. Um, but yeah, so what I do, and this is also to the Facebook user's question from earlier. I try, even though everyone might be playing the same part, I don't have everybody play a generic marimba one part. I give every player their own part on the score, even though they might be playing in unison a lot. Um, so in this case, with two players on the same marimba, I would write like marimba one high, marimba one low, and have them be just two different parts. Um, because I think it's important to me that every player feels like that part was written for them, and that they're not just all reading the same part, and that if they were to like if they were to like choose not to if they were to choose to not come to rehearsal that day, that it wouldn't matter. Of course they matter. That's why they're there. So I try to make sure that they feel like they have a part written specifically for them.
oh, all right. That sounds so cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, John, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear you?
Uh, I saw a few musicians here in my place who has difficulty in reading notes even they watch or research on the internet. So what advice or techniques can you give to the musicians who don't enough knowledge about reading notes, especially who plays marimba, vibraphone, or etc., to easily understand and also how to play it correctly?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry. Before you answer, I just want to add to something to this question because most of us here are percussionists merely, and
mhm,
because of resources, we do have lack of resources on playing the mallet percussion instrument. We're really having a hard time in learning mallet instruments. So,
mhm,
what tips can you give us on how to study and to practice reading notes on marimba or any mallet instruments to make
mhm,
it to be a fast reader because that is usually our what could I say our weaknesses here so, or most of us here because of the resources and of course with limited materials as well.
mhm. So there's a couple parts to this. Number one is regardless of what you see maybe on YouTube, we have the same problems in the United States, right? You may see all these groups with big front ensembles and all these props and whatever, um, but we have just as many problems with students having access to lessons, to an instrument, to reading. And so, what's great about the marching percussion world um, is that it started with not reading music. I mean, a lot of performers didn't read music early on. I'm talking like for us, the Civil War era, so like 1800s, right? Um, so I don't look at not reading music as a weakness, right? Especially because it's only one way of making music, right? Like there are some people that won a Grammy, I'm sure, that don't read music, right? So reading music isn't necessarily a bad thing, or not reading music. I think everybody can be creative, everybody can make music, and everybody. So if you have to teach by teaching by rote, I think by demonstrating, I think that's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there are cultural differences that obviously like keep people from reading a Western notation staff. That's fine too. It doesn't matter. I more students making music for me is never a bad thing, whether or not you can read. So I just want to start with that. I don't think you have to feel just because you can't read a 5-line staff with pitch doesn't mean that you're an inferior musician at all for anyone in the audience. You have ears, you have hands, you can make music, right?
Yeah,
Um, so I think that's an important thing in and of itself to say. Um, but if you do want to read and you do want to have that be a part of your musical vocabulary, um, it starts like anyone else, like anything else, like by practicing, right? By practicing reading, by learning your scales, learning your arpeggios, learning those basic things, so that when you see them on a staff, if I see C E G C, I don't see 4 notes. I see a C major chord, right? It's just like when I'm looking on the screen and I see Grover. I don't see those letters. I just see the word Grover. So learning to read is a skill, just like learning to play the marimba. And I think that is something to spend time doing. It takes years. It doesn't come quickly. It's not like learning a paradiddle where you can learn it in a day and then you just work on it to get it faster. It actually takes a long time to learn a staff, and that's okay. That's totally okay. Um, the other thing too is, in Indonesia and Southeast Asia and the Philippines, and you all have such beautiful uh, music native to your countries. You have Kumintang, and pull those in to your compositions and your arrangements, so that people that do that have a native sense of how those rhythms and how those instruments sound. I think that's great. I think that's a great thing to do. So um, using the resources you have to your advantage locally, I think is great. Just being okay with making music, that's fine too. If you have to teach by recording, like recording into GarageBand and then sending it along and saying, no, it goes like this, or sending a video, that is notation too. That is writing, that is sending music just like a staff does, as well. So I try to be very aware that reading music on a 5-line staff is a very specific way of creating music that not everybody has to do, and that's okay. Um, if you want to do that, learn your vocabulary, learn your alphabet, just like we do in school, and that will help you read faster.
And always start practicing it slow, right?
Yeah, slow and always slow. Yes, of course.
Okay. So I guess there we have it. Thank you so much for your time, sir, and we really appreciate that you gave us your time in presenting your topic to us, and it really gave us a lot of ideas to composition. So, do you have any advice for the composers or the starting up composers who are just doing it for, let's say, starters? Any
Mhm.
advice for them?
Just do it. You just literally just grab, like, my first compositions weren't even on a 5-line staff. They were just on a piece of paper, scribbled ideas that made sense to me, but nobody else. Again, I didn't know how. I was, like John said, I was not very good at reading pitch like a staff when I was younger. Um, I wanted to write, so I just did, and I found ways to write that were not on a 5-line staff. Just a way to get a sound I was hearing onto paper, um, and sent to someone else to play. That's all that matters when you write music. It doesn't have to be on a staff. It doesn't have to be right or correct. It just has to be you, and you will never develop your voice, and you'll never develop your own sound if you don't just keep writing. Write every day, even if it's just 5 notes. Write every day or create every day. I think that's the important thing. It doesn't have to be right composing. It can be improvising. It can be going behind a snare drum and playing something. It can be going behind a vibraphone or a bell lyre and improvising a little bit and developing an idea. That's composing too. That's okay.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you
Mm-hmm.
for thank you for that advice. And
Yeah.
thank you very much for your time, and we really appreciate it. And we hope we can
Thank you so
we can
much.
ask you again to be our guest on our upcoming activities here in Past Philippines chapter. And we really hope that you can come over to our country and to
I would
visit
love
us.
to.
Yeah.
I would love to. It's my motherland, so I want to make sure I visit it once before I die.
You have time to come here because you're really missing a big part of your life if you don't
Oh,
come here over.
no, I'm dying. I'm dying to come over here, so I want to see it and then experience it and visit the motherland.
Yeah. Okay, so before we end it up, we just like to thank everyone, the officers and the members here who made this possible, like Satur, Ryan, Isaac, Sarah, and Ken, and the rest of the members, and all the past members, past PH members as well, and for Percussive Art Society, thank you very much, and please do on our next program. It will be Jack's Do Fort, May 14 at 8 p.m. And the topic will be Latin percussion. It will be hosted by Oing Osmeña, Ken Capistrano, and Mark Hipona. So I hope all you up there will be also be watching this um, second part of our Pintig Percussion Festival. Yeah. So thank you very much, Sir Omar. And would you like to promote something? You would like to say something? Any promotions or any
Uh,
concerts?
I'd just like to thank my sponsors. You've seen their logos here the whole time, so thank them. Adams, Zildjian, Remo, Grover, Pearl, Vic Firth, for supporting the appearance, and for all of you at PAS Philippines for making this possible. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. So on behalf of PAS PH and to all the members and officers, we would like to thank you again for your time and hope we can hope we can see you around on the next show.
Mhm.
And thank you very much. And on behalf of Jason and John, this is Lexter. Thank you very much for watching Pas Pintig at Percussion Festival. Thank you and good night.
All right, thank you.